Friends, neighbors, Hills fam, thanks for joining us for this week's online teaching. We have come to the end of practicing the way, but I hope it's just the beginning of our journey in apprenticeship to Jesus. And before we get into today's conversation, which I think the practice we're going to talk about today is possibly the most formative of all the practices and often very overlooked. But before we get to it, let me just briefly recap where we've been for the last 8 weeks. We started off talking about, as a follower of Jesus, as a Christian, that means being an apprentice to Jesus. It means be with Jesus, become like him, and do as he did. Those are the 3 driving goals of an apprentice. We looked at the invitation to be with Jesus is not just a perk or an add-on of our faith. It is the goal of our faith. And Jesus, he loves us back to lovely. And so the question is not, are we abiding, but what are you abiding in? And then we covered spiritual formation and said that we are all being formed or deformed all the time by our habits, relationships, stories, environments over time and experience. And then this brought us to the practices of Jesus, those things that we can do to allow Jesus to do what we cannot do in ourselves, bring that real deep heart change. And we said that grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. And we looked at how the practices can only take us so far. The practices are good and I highly recommend them, but they can only take us so far. And one aspect of our spiritual formation is freedom from 3 dimensions of sin: the sin done by us, the sin done to us, and the sin around us. And healing comes through the practice of confession. We set out to craft a rule of life, which is a way to organize our lives around formation. And then last week, Gigi reminded us that in pain and suffering, God can use that to form us and that nothing is wasted. I created a summary document of what we've talked about the last few weeks, and it has links to the teachings and different tools that we've discussed. There's a link to a podcast. And then all the way at the bottom of the document, there are some recommended reading and books from the folks at Practicing the Way, just to continue the journey. I hope this series will prove to have ongoing fruit in your life as you think about who you are becoming. Who are you being formed? Are you being formed to look more like Jesus? Or are we being deformed away from Jesus? And change, it doesn't happen overnight. Even in these 8 weeks, maybe looking back, maybe you've started some of these practices, you crafted a rule of life and you've gotten started, but really haven't seen much change yet. But that's okay. That is okay. We are on a journey together, so stick with it. And I was so encouraged as I read Practicing the Way and reread it as we went through this series that so much of what John Mark talks about in the book are practices and things that we are already trying to embrace and live out in the Hills Church. There was one chapter where he's talking about hospitality and sharing meals, and he's quoting from a book and several books that I've used in previous sermon series. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Even with our missional practices, when we talk about bells, where we bless and we eat and we listen and we learn and we see ourselves as sent. And as I was reading, many of your faces came to mind. I was like, man, they're already doing that. So and so, that's how they are living. And then in conversations I've had, even in our microchurch and with some of the microchurch leaders, like I have learned from you, and we're learning together. And I'm just so encouraged that we're on this journey together. And one thing you may not realize is that it's not just our church. But just last week, I got an update from Practicing the Way that over 16,000 churches have used their resources. And over 100,000 people have taken the spiritual reflection. That's incredible. Like God is at work in his church, and he is forming a people for himself. And that's what we're talking about today, the people of God, community, and how God uses community to shape us. And if you're watching this video, there is a high likelihood that you are planning to be part of microchurch this weekend, which I would say, well done. Well done. Like, you are on your way. You are winning. I'm proud of you for being part of community. Now, if I were to ask you, what does it mean to be a Christian? Most of us would start with Jesus, his death, his resurrection, how you have to put your trust in Jesus for your salvation. You might mention that he's coming back one day and restoring all things. I wonder, though, if you would mention anything about a Christian as one who is part of the larger family of God, who is part of the church. Would you think of the church as maybe an extra, like, I've got my faith with Jesus, and so, the church it's good, it can be helpful at times, and maybe not so helpful at times, if we're honest. But is church periphery to the faith, or is it central? Is it core to the faith? I have mentioned this book several times throughout the years at the Hills Church. It is one of what I would call the 5 formative books for how I think about my faith and as a leader. And it's called Paul, the Spirit, and the People of God. It's a little bit technical, a little bit theological, a little dense, but he talks about what it means to be the people of God and salvation. And here's what he says, and I think it's so very insightful. He says, a single person is sitting at home in front of the TV. A Christian broadcast is on, a sermon is preached, an invitation is given, and the person responds by accepting Christ. But the only church the person attends is by way of the TV, with no connection to a local body of believers. The question is this person saved? I would answer, only God knows. But such salvation lies totally outside the New Testament frame of reference. This book is over 30 years old, so you could remove sitting in front of your TV, on your screen, listening to a podcast, and I think it would apply. And I should mention the author Gordon Fee, world-renowned New Testament scholar. I mean, he is brilliant. He goes on to say, the individual is the be-all and end-all of everything. Subservience of individual rights to the common good has become the new heresy to be rejected at all cost. The individual is God. Self-interest and self-centeredness is the chief end of life. Man, if he could only see us now. And he goes on to say, though entered individually, salvation is seldom, if ever, thought of simply as a one-on-one relationship with God. While such a relationship is included, to be sure, to be saved means especially to be joined to the people of God. In this sense, the 3rd century church father Cyprian had it right. There is no salvation outside the church, because God is saving a people for his name, not a miscellaneous, unconnected set of individuals. Thus, our present concern is the primary goal of salvation, an eschatological people who together live the life of the future in the present age as they wait the final consummation. And then he says, God is not just saving individuals and preparing them for heaven. Rather, he is creating a people. He is creating a people among whom he can live and who in their life together will reproduce God's life and character. That is fire. That is fire. In other words, the goal for which we have been individually saved is for participation in the people of God. The church, we are to be a people who live out the ethics of God's coming kingdom in the present. We believe that Jesus is going to return, that he's going to make all things new, and that his kingdom is going to be a kingdom of shalom, of peace, of justice, without poverty and without power imbalances or without lack. And the author, Gordon Fee, is saying that we've been called, we've been saved to be a kingdom people now, even as we wait for the final consummation. All that to say, being part of the church or the family of God or the people of God is central to our faith. It is not an add-on. It's not a periphery like, oh, if I feel like it as a Jesus follower. No, it is the reason for which we have been saved, to be part of the people of God. There's an ancient proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. A few weeks ago, we looked at how Jesus in Mark chapter 1 calls his first disciples with a simple call of follow me. And then later in Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus called 12 that they might be with him in Mark 3:14. And that number 12 it's significant. It is not incidental or accidental or just because it was Jesus' favorite number. He's like, I got 12. No. When Jesus calls the 12, what he is doing is he is creating a new Israel in a sense. He is living out, because Israel had 12 tribes, and now he has 12 disciples. He is setting up a new community, a new family, or a renewed Israel, if you like that terminology better. And it's not a family that's based on blood, but it's based on apprenticeship to Jesus. And later in Mark chapter 3, Jesus says one of the most shocking things, I think, that he says in all of his teachings. And he says lots of shocking things. In Mark chapter 3, verse 31, it says, then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. Who are my mother and my brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. This is radical. Jesus is elevating his followers to the level of blood family. And the word that Jesus uses for brothers is the Greek word adelphos, which you probably already knew that because you know about Philadelphia, the city of what? Of brotherly love. And if you look at the spelling there, you can see the second part of Philadelphia lines up with adelphos because that's how the word is built there. And it means brother, it can mean sibling. And here's a cool Bible trivia fact that I don't think is very trivial at all, is that the word adelphos, or brothers, is used to describe Jesus' followers more than any other description of Jesus' followers, except for maybe disciple. And the usage changed over time, but if you look at the New Testament, the Jesus followers are called brothers. There's this familial type of connotation with the word. So in Acts chapter 9, it says, so Ananias departed and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, brother Saul. Now this is right after Saul has been persecuting the church, and so for Ananias to call him brother is significant. Acts 17, then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Now when it says brothers in Acts 17, it's not talking about blood relatives, it's talking about believers, Jesus followers. The Apostle Paul, he calls Christians brothers at least 130 times, and all throughout his writings, especially in the introduction to his epistles and letters that he writes. In Romans 8, he says, so then, brothers, we are debtors, not to the flesh. A little bit later, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that we might be the firstborn among many brothers. Adelphos is a collective noun, which means it includes women as well. So Greek, like Spanish, has gender built into the words itself. And so for example, if I'm speaking to a group of people and I want to call them all friends in Spanish, what's the word? Amigos, right? That is masculine. The word is masculine, but it doesn't mean just men. It doesn't mean just boys. It can also include women, amigos, friends, everybody. It's the same with adelphos in Scripture, and so a lot of translations will pick up on this, and will, in fact, instead of just translating brothers as we read, other translations will say brothers and sisters, and that is actually a more correct or more not strategic, but pinpoint. I can't think of the word. You probably have thought of the word I'm looking for. A more accurate translation. The point of this is that when we put our trust in Christ, is that God becomes our Father and we become part of the family of God, brothers and sisters that transcends all lines, racial lines, class lines, gender lines, political lines, all of it. And a focus on spiritual disciplines, as we've been doing the last 8 weeks, taking this spiritual formation and the audit and doing all this thing, it can begin to collapse in on itself if we're not careful. Like it's just my personal thing. I'm doing this and I'm working on this. And what the practice of community does is it helps us realize that Jesus is not just trying to form you individually into a person of love, but he is trying to build us into a community of love. He's trying to build us into a community of love. And this has all sorts of implications for our apprenticeship to Jesus. And I would go so far as to say, you can't follow Jesus alone. I'm not saying you shouldn't follow Jesus alone, which you shouldn't, but I'm actually saying you can't. It is not possible to follow Jesus alone. What's the greatest commandment? Love God, love your neighbor as yourself, love others. How will they know that you are my disciples? Jesus says to his disciples, how you love one another. If there's no one another, if there's no neighbor that you are loving, if there's no one in the body of Christ that you are loving, like you cannot obey the command to love Jesus and love your neighbor. Check out this brief video from Practicing the Way that describes the different level of relationships that we need.
There is a growing body of research from the social sciences that groups relationships into different categories based on group size and the depth of vulnerability. One of the most widely accepted paradigms is from Dr. Robin Dunbar of Oxford. It's called Dunbar's number. He calls our inner circle our intimates. This is 1 to 5 people max, who deeply know us as we are, our shadow and our light, and who, ideally, love us as we are. Of course, many in the West have no intimates, the fallout of Western individualism and the breakdown of the family. But hopefully, you have a few people you can bare your soul to, a spouse or best friend or mentor. The next circle is our friends, which goes up to 15 people. This is the people we do life with. We practice the one another's of the New Testament. We help each other move. We go on vacation together. We share meals. We drop off groceries when people are sick. This is our community. The next threshold is around the 150 person mark. Sociologists call this the law of 150, as 150 is about the maximum number of people we can be in relationship with, and it's the optimal group size for human organization. While there are some very large churches, this is also about the size of most local churches. And we draw on this wider social network for all sorts of things. This is our village, per se. The final circle is our tribe, the larger group we identify with and belong to. We don't know all these people personally, but this group is where we get a vision of life and a call to live with meaning and purpose. For many in the secular world, this could be a company or political party or a sports team. For us as followers of Jesus, this is the Church of Jesus. And when it comes to our spiritual formation, we need relationships across all 4 circles. Jesus had relationships at every layer. He had 3 intimates, Peter, James, and John. He had the 12 and a few close friends like Mary and Martha. Then he had the group of 120 in Jerusalem. Then the larger church that he left behind. Healthy people have relationships in all 4 circles. But our deepest formation, growth, healing, and change all happens in the smaller circles. We all need what Celtic Christians called an anam cara, or a soul friend, to bear our most vulnerable burdens with. C.S. Lewis once said, the essence of friendship can be summed up in the phrase, "You too?" Meaning, friends come together around a shared joy, like backpacking or surfing or reading fiction. In a spiritual friendship, the shared joy is Jesus. And we need a community to do life with. We were created to live deeply relational lives. And it's in the first two circles of our closest community that we experience deep, lasting transformation.
Those circles of relationships sound really awesome. Like, who doesn't want 2 or 3 really close friends who you can share everything with, and then a larger community where you're taking care of one another? The problem is that these types of relationships, especially in the first 2 circles, are so hard. They're so hard. Relationships, they just come with baggage and with pain, just kind of baked right into it. You could probably tell stories about how you've been hurt by a fellow believer, maybe somebody in microchurch, maybe somebody said something hurtful. They didn't show up for you when you were going through a crisis. They didn't invite you to that hangout. Maybe they shared something that you shared with them in confidence, and they shared it with some other people. Maybe somebody broke trust, or they canceled plans last minute that you had, or they forgot your birthday, or they don't return your text. You know who you are. But all that to say is that relationships are hard. The therapist Susie House once said, "Our deepest wounds come from relationships, but so does our deepest healing." Our deepest wounds come from relationships, but so does our deepest healing. And I think she's right on both accounts. It's natural to withdraw from relationships when we've been hurt. Like, if I'm hurt in community, or someone lets me down, or like, we take it personally, and we should. I'm not saying just to forget about it, like it didn't happen. But there is real pain and there's real hurt there, and the tendency when that happens is for us to withdraw from relationships. And not just when someone has hurt us personally, but I've also seen it where someone in the church is struggling and life has been hard, or they're just walking through a valley. Maybe it's about a different relationship, and because of that, they just kind of pull back. I'm like, please don't do that. You need to lean in. And the best time to decide that you're going to lean in when you're going through the valley is to decide ahead of time. Like, even run some scenarios right now. Like, if this were to happen, then how would I show up in community? What if my marriage is facing choppy waters? Like, how am I going to show up in community? And the first 2 circles of the relationships, as he mentioned, Dunbar's numbers, intimates and friends, they are essential for our well-being, they're for our growth. But these relationships, they are not easy. They take intentionality. They don't just happen. John Mark Comer, in a different teaching, he mentions that there's 3 characteristics of spiritual friendship, and I think they're worth repeating. The first he mentions is depth. That these relationships are not superficial, where we just chat about the weather or about the nuggets or how work is going, but we get below the surface. It's like some deeper, heartfelt, like what's keeping me up at night kind of thing. So there's some depth there. The second characteristic is vulnerability. Well, you can read it, even if I can't say it. Being vulnerable, like of the 3, I think being vulnerable is the one that I struggle with the most. There's something that, I don't know, like maybe I feel like I have to portray strength, or like I have it all together, or because I'm a pastor, if I'm sharing my struggles, and so vulnerability is a real struggle for me. I've been told that I keep my cards close to my chest, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. But I'm working on it. And we need to come together, not just in our strengths, but in our weaknesses as well, and to be honest, to be transparent with each other. And part of that is being able to tell the truth to one another and to receive the truth. Like, we need people who will comfort us when we are struggling, and we need people to confront us when we are maybe going wayward, when we're getting off track, when we need to come back. But it's hard, right? I feel like we do a good job of comforting one another, being there for one another, but the confronting one another, oh man, if you've ever tried it, and then the person gets upset, and then they walk away, and then like, well, and so then the next time it comes up in a different relationship, and we want to be able to speak the truth into each other's lives, and we're like, maybe we're more hesitant. But my prayer for us is, as a community, is that we would comfort one another, and we would confront each other in love so that we can grow together. The third characteristic is transformation. It's just transformation. Like in our relationships, not in our apprenticeship to Jesus. Like not plateauing, not coming to the point where we think, all right, now I've arrived, I'm good, and just kind of coasting. But always growing in our faith, always challenging one another. Spiritual friendships do not work if only one person is committed to the relationship. It takes at least two. In our micro churches, I want to challenge us to move into a place of more depth, to move into a place of vulnerability, to move into more transformation together, like being honest. And this doesn't mean like there's those different circles. Doesn't mean that micro church is Sunday like you have to share every one of your secrets. Like that's not what happens in a group of 12 to 15. But maybe with a group of 1 or 2 or 3, that could happen. But I still think there is a commitment that we can have to one another where I think it was in the book, John Mark says that we can't live without sin, but we can live without secrets. We can't live without sin, but we can live without secrets. And I hope for us in microchurch, in our church community at large, that we will be real, that we will be authentic, that we will be a place where we can come and grow together as apprentices of Jesus. We follow Jesus together. So let's learn together, let's grow together, let's love one another, let's commit to be there for one another. I think when we do that, we will be transformed into the type of community that is marked by love. How will they know that you are my disciples? If you love one another. Grace and peace.